life is kind of miraculous. This little tiny body contains, a tiny heart, a tiny brain, little lungs. Like, it contained all these things that created life and processed life and held life. And now I'm trying to take this thing apart and put it back together so other people can feel this sense of wonder and kind of make their own connection to this animal.
From NCPR, welcome to Northwards. People, ideas, and conversations from and about Northern New York, Vermont, and beyond. I'm Mitch Teich.
Support for the Northwards podcast comes from the J.C. Steiniger and M.E. McDonald Charitable Fund at Adirondack Foundation, in support of the Adirondack Foundation, building stronger Adirondack communities.
So I have to admit, it was a little hard prepping for this interview while my two dogs hung out in my home office. They're actually here right now, and it's still a little hard. We're going to meet a professional taxidermist in just a minute. And, like a lot of people, I've gone to my share of natural history museums over the years and looked at the dioramas with preserved animals, some of which might even be extinct, the passenger pigeon, the ivory-billed woodpecker. And I'd look and maybe even look closely at the specimens and then move on to the next one, or move on to the rocks or the butterfly garden or whatever. But Divya Ananthraman would encourage you not to just move on. To listen to her talk is to remember that the animals that taxidermists preserve lived lives, as my two dogs are living their lives, and that before they were sent to them, the taxidermist that is, they were flying or climbing trees or maybe burrowing under your garden shed or breathing heavily like Linus the cockapoo is doing right now. Ananthraman lives in New York City. She's the person behind Gotham Taxidermy and has won a slew of awards for her work. She also travels the country teaching workshops and encouraging others who might want to try their hands at the field, even if they aren't thinking of it as a profession. That includes a couple of workshops at the Adirondack Experience on August 17th and 18th. My own experience with animal preservation probably began and ended with frog dissection in ninth grade biology, but it turns out that taxidermy is just one of those fields I had a lot of questions about. So let me just say, Divya Ananthraman, it is a delight to meet you. Thank you for taking the time.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So where do you think taxidermy falls in the continuum where maybe art is on one end and science is on the other?
Oh, that's a great question. I think it falls right in the middle. It contains, to me, it contains the best of both worlds. It contains the best of art and the best of science, which is amazing because both of those worlds have so many wonderful aspects to them.
Was it one side or the other, the art or the science, that first attracted you to the field? I mean, how did you happen to come to it?
What attracted me to the field was that taxidermy really does contain, so much equal parts of art and science. I think the fact that it didn't really fit fully, it didn't fit fully into one or the other, that it contained multitudes. I think that's what attracted me to it. And that is what keeps me interested in it today.
Were you a sciencey kid or someone that just was into animals? Or, I think being interested in it is one thing, but kind of pursuing it as either a hobby or a profession as you do is something a little more than that.
Absolutely. So what attracted me to taxidermy first was truly, it was a love of animals. A lot of taxidermists grow up in, the woods or access to a lot of, they're around nature. They are surrounded by nature, whether it's, forests, mountains, and these places we think of as these holy, sacred, natural spaces. I grew up in Miami, and I currently live and have been living for the past 22 years in New York City. So I've always been in an urban environment, but I was an animal lover, especially a lover of birds, because birds do frequent all of these urban environments. And the way I made a lot of my first and most memorable connections to animals was going to natural history museums and seeing taxidermy. And although they weren't as lively as the animals that are outside that you can observe with live observation, what the taxidermy did was it gave me that time with animals. You can sit by a diorama until the museum closes. You can have all the time you want with that animal, which you don't get with wild observation. And you're not guaranteed wild observation either. So it was really just a love and fascination of animals that brought me to it. And seeing what that stillness illuminates, that kept me and still keeps me going with it.
Well, and this was not your original career plan, right?
No, in fact, I worked in the fashion industry for a little over 10 years. And I've, again, always had this love of, I always loved animals and I was always doing animal related hobbies, whether they were volunteer efforts or doing cat rescue, like I'm a cat rescuer as well, and just doing these animal related things. And of course, I had taxidermy going as a hobby. It was something that I did, through reading books and watching videos and stuff like that. But while I was working in the fashion industry, I worked in accessories and shoes, which involve a lot of work with leather. And the more I worked with leather, I saw how much of the animal is sort of it's treated like a product as opposed to a whole being. And that's what bothered me because what's nice about leather, why people love leather, is that it's the skin of an animal. It's got grain, it's got character. And yet we throw away so much, so many of the undesirable parts, or we kind of say, like, it's just not like treated with reverence. And, how could it be? You're working for a company looking to make a profit. Of course, it's not, reverence and profit don't go hand in hand in our world. So that really kind of like got me thinking about doing taxidermy and pursuing it more and more. So while I was working in fashion, I pursued it as a hobby, put my work out there on social media. I took classes and did as much learning as I could. And slowly, I kind of transitioned away from the fashion world and transitioned into the world of taxidermy.
Do you remember the first animal you ever worked on doing a taxidermy project?
Yes, I do. It was a small gray squirrel that I'd found. I was hiking and it was very snowy outside. So I was like, oh my gosh, this squirrel is literally frozen. So yeah, it was this gray squirrel and it was so horrible. It turned out so horribly that I was just hooked on the process. And I really do wish I'd kept it because I gave it to a friend, but I really wish I'd kept it because I'd love to look back on it and to see if it was really as horrible as I remembered it being. I think that, I think being a beginner, you kind of, you expect something, but then you kind of are, I think beginners are much harder on themselves than someone who's done something for a long time. So yeah, I wish I'd kept it.
Did it feel like a big step for you to come across this frozen squirrel and like actually pick it up and take it home with you?
Yeah, absolutely. It was it's really important to remember every taxidermy project starts with an animal and that animal had a life and that there's so much reverence to that life that is contained there. I think that is like that's something that never leaves and that just that through the years, like I've been doing taxidermy professionally for about 10 years, and so through the years there are lots of things and lots of professions you get desensitized to. There's like almost an increased or like a hypersensitivity to that reverence for life that's there. So I feel like the first time, what has changed is the first time that I saw that squirrel, the first time that I came across that little body, I didn't have the words for what I felt. Now I have a few more words, but I don't think I'll ever fully have all the words for those emotions and just that feeling of like, wow, life is so precious. Life is kind of miraculous, this little tiny body contains, a tiny heart, a tiny brain, little lungs, like it contained all these things that created life and processed life and held life. And now I'm trying to take this thing apart and put it back together so other people can feel this sense of wonder and kind of make their own connection to this animal. Yeah.
You mentioned natural history museums, and that's I'm sure where most of us first encountered taxidermy, and for a long time, that was the main way these museums did exhibits, and I know that's changed in some ways, but it does still seem to be a big part of the equation.
I think so. I think that natural history museums, there is so much importance in the connection to animals that people have, especially for an urban environment, especially as, cities get bigger and bigger, which is, these are the epicenters where people are living, but it still doesn't mean that we can stop thinking about nature. We still live on this planet. I can live fully in the middle of the concrete jungle, but I'm still a part of nature. We're all still a part of nature. And I think that natural history museums, with taxidermy especially, they play this really important role in connecting us to nature and showing us that, although we're separated by glass, this bird can fly and I can't. I have to buy a ticket and wait in line and go through security if I want to fly. I can just get up and flap away. But there's a beauty in that, right? There's beauty in like, oh, what are our differences? What are our similarities? How are we connected? And you kind of experience the gravity and the presence of that animal through taxidermy and through something sculptural in a way that you can't experience through a digital or a two-dimensional. Being around that presence and and even contemplating mortality, the fact that there was a death there. I think that those are all such important those are such important conversations that we need to have, especially as our ecology is so delicate and so threatened.
So we're talking a couple of days before you do some workshops at the Adirondack Experience, and I know you do other workshops around the country. In fact, do you have a sense for well, I guess maybe this is two questions.
Yeah.
Why others want to try their hand in your field, and why the educational part of what you do is such an important aspect of your work.
Oh my gosh, we could have a whole hour where I talk about this specific topic. Yeah, I think that so yes, I'm teaching classes at the Adirondack Experience this weekend. I'm so excited. I'm so excited to teach there. It's a beautiful place, and they're so passionate about the ecology of their location, all the nature there, and they do such a beautiful job of of showing you what that area is and why it's so important. With the classes in general, I think what I love about teaching is sharing this craft, this art, this science, putting it in other people's hands and seeing what they do with it. For a long time, taxidermy and the related practices of, specimen preparation and just the work around death and aftercare of animals was very guarded and very gate kept. And that was a huge challenge for me when I was trying to learn it. There weren't a lot of classes that were accessible to me either by location because, I'm in the city, didn't have a car, so couldn't drive anywhere, couldn't drive, and also didn't want to invest like a whole week or 2 weeks or a month in something that at that time I didn't know if it would be a career or just a hobby. So it's, investments of time, investments of money, investments of location and movement, like those are barriers that people face. So I think when you kind of remove those barriers and start to make the classes a little more accessible, that's something that's very exciting and very interesting. I think the other thing I'm seeing, and it kind of goes back to your previous question about change, I think the other thing I'm seeing with the classes is that there's so much diversity in who comes to take the classes. It's people who have been historically excluded from this field and people from all different backgrounds. Some people take this class and they're not trying to become a taxidermist. They just want to try something with their hands. They want to connect to animals and nature. There's that aspect. And there's also the aspect that this gets you away from a screen. It's the most real life experience you can have, really. You're confronting life, you're confronting death, you're confronting this being, and it's like you and this animal, and you're in a place with it. And you have to learn like a bunch of different skills like sewing, sculpting, looking at anatomy, kind of seeing a bit of engineering and how something works and how to put it back together. So I think that it's a combination of all of those things of removing the barriers, making it accessible, and giving people an experience that is less and less common in our daily lives. I think that's what brings people to it. And on top of that, is having an outlet for creativity and curiosity.
Not to overstate the differences between people in New York or Los Angeles or Philadelphia and people in the North Country where wildlife is so much closer. Do you feel differences when you're working in a place like the Adirondack Experience versus, going to some place like Philadelphia or LA?
Absolutely. There's such a difference. And I think the best thing about teaching is that as I'm teaching taxidermy, I'm teaching the skill, but I get to learn. Like, this is a beautiful thing that I tell all of my students. I'm teaching, but I'm also learning from all of my students. I'm learning about their experiences and their perspectives. And I think all of that just enriches, it just enriches the field. Students in the big cities are going to have one experience and background with wildlife. Students in places where you are completely immersed in nature have another experience with wildlife. And there's so much beauty and learning in all of that.
So, on the occasions when you're not traveling and doing workshops, what is a day in the life of a professional taxidermist like?
The day in the life of a professional taxidermist would be really similar to, a day in the life of probably any small business owner or artist practitioner of any type. So I'm usually working in my studio. I do classes at my studio as well in New York City. That's usually on the weekends, but the weekdays I'm working in my studio, working on commission projects, working on projects for different clients. There's also, of course, like administrative work, the not so fun stuff like emails and bookkeeping and all of that. But yeah, it's really like a day of doing all different types of work.
For somebody who's never gone through the process, how long does a typical commission piece take from, I guess, beginning to end?
That's a great question. So it really depends on, like, the length of a project really depends on difficulty of the project, how complex it is. So it's not necessarily size that is the factor as opposed to complexity, because something very small, like, if I'm working on a hummingbird or something, that can actually take me a lot longer to work on than a crow because the details are much smaller and much finer. So I would say a project can take anywhere from a few weeks to a few months or even a few years if it's a really large project. And to be sustainable as a business, you've also got to work on multiple projects at a time. So when you add that to it, you're looking at something that is not fast, but is very rewarding.
So you might be working on a crow in the morning and realize that you also have these 3 or 4 other commissions that are in progress, and you have to get something done on each of them.
Yeah, I'm usually working on multiple. Usually a day is working on multiple projects, spending time with multiple projects. Yeah, for sure.
Is there a typical client or typical type of client that you work for? I mean, who's coming to you to have these projects done?
That's a great question. So my typical clients are, they kind of range all around. So I work with museums and conservation groups and, people who are looking for specimens for either just straightforward scientific display and just straightforward display, or I also work with conservation groups on doing study skins and things like that. So those are some of my typical clients. On the other side, I also have clients who are usually first time taxidermy buyers, which I think is really cool because there are people who are like, I never thought I wanted taxidermy in my home until I saw work like this, which is probably the hugest like compliment you can get because I'm like, oh wow, like, you think taxidermy is just like a head on a wall, but no, it's like a full and vast and expansive art form. So there are people who are more art collectors that are some of my clients, which is like really, really fun. And there are also clients who are looking for companion animal preservation. So I know people who, raise birds or have companions that they want to keep a memento of. Sometimes that's taxidermy. Oftentimes it's more of a memento or like a partial preservation, like doing something with a skull or some sort of more like memento mori type of piece as opposed to a straightforward taxidermy.
I imagine you are not the one doing, the head of the deer or the moose or whatever, though, for someone's trophy wall.
Not quite. My passion is birds, so birds are what I do. Although if someone is looking for that, there are plenty of people I can refer them to, and plenty of people who specialize in that, which is great.
Give us a sense for what's in your studio. What are the kinds of tools that you need to do the things that you do?
There are so many different types of tools. I would say that there are a lot of tools from hardware store, a lot of tools from the art supply store, lots of tools from the sewing store, and then a lot of the work I do is very fine. So I also have a lot of tools from beauty supply shops, like various different weird little tweezers, various little snippers. Of course, lots of knives, lots of scalpels, small scalpel blades. I love, like, I've kind of collect a bit of everything. Yeah, there's a bit of everything tool wise. If there's a store that sells tools, I'll probably go in there and buy something.
Well, and is it improvised? Have you figured out like what you need over the years? I mean, I imagine there's probably not like a definitive book that says you must have, this brand of tweezers and this brand of pliers or anything. This seems like something that, as the artist, you would figure out on your own.
Yeah, I mean, there are for certain things for like the commercial taxidermy practice, like for someone, the folks I know who are like, all I do are deer heads and turkeys and ducks. I have these tools. These are my prescribed set of tools. I think for me, because the things I work on are so varied and so, they're not really like the typical commercial taxidermy specimens because because things are specialized and sometimes I'll get a client like right now I'm working on something for a client. There are these replica flamingos I'm working on, but they're supposed to look like they're coming out of clouds. So I'm like, how do I make a cloud? So it's sort of like I don't even know it till I got like a doll. I got some needle felting tools for that. I got some like doll making needles for that. So this is sort of like kind of do figure it out as you go, but then I'm not a single use person. I'm like, if I buy this tool, I need to figure out how to use it for something else. Which is pretty fun. And I think most artistic practices, whether they're doing commercial work or custom work or something in between, I think most artists really have a special relationship with their tools, and figuring out their, expansive uses for them.
Well, and forgive me if this is a strange question, but what does your studio smell like?
It smells like a Santa Maria, this like candle I got from this store in New York called Santa Maria Novella. It's like my favorite store. That's like these scents that have been made in a monastery in Florence since like since before time, I guess. So it smells old, but not in a bad way. It smells like an old, like something from the 12th century, I guess.
But it does not
way.
smell like chemicals and preservatives and stuff from the specimens themselves.
No. Oh, that's a huge misconception that people have about taxidermy smelling bad. Like it shouldn't. I mean, I would say the skinning process, yes, you're gonna have smells with that. But it's probably the same smells that you smell at dinner time when you're cooking chicken. If you cook meat, like it probably smells worse actually when you're cooking meat because with taxidermy we're not kind of keep everything really, really clean. But yeah, the studio, like I think there was one time where like certain animals, like if they've been really sick or if they've been really deteriorated, that's when you'll experience smells, but then they're not usually suitable. If something's very deteriorated and rotting, it's not suitable for taxidermy, so it wouldn't come in here. So yeah.
Well, and maybe this is another strange question, but do you have an interesting relationship with your FedEx or your UPS guy who has to be bringing remains of animals every day?
Well, not really. I mean, usually, to be like respectful to them and to myself and have my, and to my clients, like usually everything should be packaged up really well. So anyone who's shipping these specimens, they get like a 3-page guide on how to ship. It's really not super complicated. It's just making sure it's frozen, putting it in a cooler, taping it up. But yeah, I think it's for the better that people don't know what's coming because everyone has their own attitudes towards death. And I wouldn't want to be, disrespectful to anyone's, beliefs around that. But yeah, that's why I do always tell people when they're shipping to me, though, I'm like, you need to understand that outside is not a freezer. So you need to realize like it's very important to follow packing instructions and shipping directions very closely. And, there are some people who'll send me specimens. They're like, are you sure you want to pay for overnight? It's so expensive. I'm like, what's expensive is getting a bloody box, because then I'm on a blacklist. So no, we're gonna splurge on this, for the sanctity of the specimen, for just everyone involved. Yeah, you kind of have to go a little overboard with shipping, but yeah.
Do you listen to music when you're doing this, or do you have to have, absolute silence to be able to concentrate?
I would say it's a bit of both. Sometimes I listen to music. Most of the times I'm listening to podcasts or audiobooks.
I guess that maybe just this one kind of question to bring it all home. Do you feel like who do you feel like you're honoring when you take a client's project on?
That's a great question. when I take a client's project on, I'm honoring the client really, because I'm wanting to give them what, I'm trying to give them what they're expecting and trying to give them what they're looking for. There's also, you're also honoring the animal. Like there's no denying that. I think that it's so dependent, like if I'm working with a companion animal, I'm honoring that animal, the client, and their relationship. That's really what you're honoring. If I'm working on something more straightforward, like something for a scientific organization, you're honoring that organization, the animal, and the audience, the public who's going to see that animal, right? You're sort of coming up with, okay, you're like, okay, we need to do it in this pose. Well, this pose, why? What story is this pose telling? What, what's the message it's sending to other people? So you're really honoring, the people involved and their relationship to the animal, so that animal itself, and honoring the animal in turn to do that. So it's sort of like not just one specific entity, but it's like the animals, the people, and their connection to each other.
Well, it's really fascinating work that you do, and you talk about it so eloquently, Divya. I'm so grateful to have gotten to spend some time with you.
Thank you so much. This was so great. I'm really glad.
Divya Ananthraman is a taxidermist and the proprietor of New York City-based Gotham Taxidermy. We talked with Ananthraman just before she came to Blue Mountain Lake for a couple of taxidermy workshops at the Adirondack Experience. You can read more about those workshops and everything else she does at ncpr.org/northwards. It's not quite the same as taxidermy, but Ethan Shanty will honor all the people who make this show possible by preserving them through the closing credits.
Northwards is an NCPR podcast production. The show is written, edited, and produced by Mitch Tyke with digital production supervision by me, Ethan Shanty. Caitlin Kelly handles our social media, Bill Hanel is our digital director, and Doyle Dean is our production manager. Music is by the Wickmore Jazz Trio of Plattsburgh. To support this show and find more podcasts, visit ncpr.org. This is NCPR, North Country Public Radio.